Are you looking for a modern, simple, fun bag pattern? This could might be it. Hi, my name's Jill. Welcome back to my channel. So today we are looking at the Wave. Now this is part of my Urban Bag series. There's the Urban Arc, which I'll put the link to below. This is the tutorial for the Urban Wave. So let's have a look at the bag. This is the one I've been using for over a month now. It is in vinyl with a denim front. Now it depends on your machine whether you can make it in a vinyl or a fabric. Personally, I quite like it in a denim or something a little bit more casual, but let's have a look at the pattern features. It is a very rounded bag, and it is not just rounded at the bottom, it is curved that way as well. So it's not just a flat bag. Inside, it has a custom zipper overlay with 2 credit card slots. And that is quite a fun make. Now, obviously, you can just do a simple pocket in there if you wish. It has got a zipper overlay on the back, and it's got a split pocket in the front. Now, you can obviously make that a full pocket. It's got these strap loops and this really funky, adjustable, knotted strap. Now, it's really comfortable to wear because it keeps the 2 straps over the shoulder, and it's so easy to adjust. But if you've got it tight enough, it's not going to just slide as people are wearing it. Now, this is the one I've been using for a month now. I just wear it as a shoulder or make it a crossbody. And it's really comfortable, and I've got so many compliments on this bag. So this is going to be a tutorial. I have shortened through bits where I'm sewing. I have sewn this one today in the tutorial, and I've sewn that on my domestic HD9. So if you enjoy what you see today, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel because I am going to be releasing more patterns as the year goes. And if you enjoy our Wave, please let me know in the comments. And if you don't, let me know why in the comments as well, because it helps me improve my patterns in the future. So thank you for watching, and I'll stop talking and get on and sew now. So this is everything we're going to need to make our Wave as I'm ready to sew it. So let's have a look what we've got. The only variation I'm doing to the pattern is I am adding a small trim along the top of my front exterior pocket, just because I'm using this wool and I think it might wear on the edge. So I have got my logo, which I've put off to one side because I am going to divide pocket as is suggested in the pattern. So I've got my 2 exteriors. I have added interfacing to that one. Then I've got my 2 bodies, both exterior, contrast on the back, and I have got this micro fleece. Now I'm calling it micro fleece because it is very, very thin, but it really does give it just a little bit of body. Then I've got my 2 linings, which I have interfaced. Then we have got our C1 middles, again the fleece and interfacing, linings interfacing, and the sides. Now that's the same fleece and interfacing, but you do need to cut these pieces here as shown in the pattern. So that is quite imperative that they're cut accurately, and you'll see why as we go through the pattern. Then I'm using the loops. I'm not using D-rings. So I have got the loops cut. Now because I'm using fabric, this does stretch, so I have added interfacing, and I've got my 2 strap pieces. So we'll go through that in more detail later, but I have added a small amount of fleece. Now this is standard fleece rather than foam, and I'll show you that as we go through it. Now this standard pattern comes with a credit card overlay. So it's an interior zipper overlay with 2 credit card slots. And I'll go through that and show you how it's made. Do not be tempted to overcut this because they can split between, and we'll go through a few things how we can strengthen that. One of them is to add interfacing to your credit card backing, which will give that a bit of stability. And also the credit card linings, I have interfaced those. Now, if you're using something thicker and don't want to over interface, even if you just do the top inch or so, that will give that whole overlay a little bit more structure. Then we just have a standard zipper overlay going on the back. So we have our overlay and our 2 pockets. So I've got my 3 zips, one for the exterior and one for each of the pockets. So really, this pattern is so light in hardware. I am using 3 zipper pulls and some rivets. Now, I do suggest using the rivets. It does add a little bit something, and it does strengthen a couple of areas, which we're going to do. You can attach the strap with swivel hooks, and I may choose to do that as I do that, but you don't need to make that decision right now. So let's get on and make our Wave. So what we want, we're going to start with our 2B pieces. So we've got our exterior and what we're using for our lining. Now normally in the pattern we would do them right sides together, sew along the top, turn it over like that, and top stitch, and that would be it. I'm not going to do that because of the fabric I'm using. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to line those pieces up, and I'm simply going to baste across the top to put a trim on. So the piece I'm using is a piece of vinyl. It is 3/4 of an inch. Now I don't have any 10mm tape, which I normally use, so I'm going to use a piece. I just want to keep it out of where I'm going to be sewing. So I'm going to put 2 pieces on that. I'll use a 3mm and a 6, just so that I'm keeping it out of the seams. So if you need to trim the top of that, do. I think that needs a little bit of a trim. The other reason I've trimmed that is because normally this would be 6mm shorter because we would be turning the seam. So what you want to do now is just put that just under halfway on the tape. Like that, and fold that over. So I am finding this machine doesn't like sewing on vinyl very well. So I'm just going to put a little piece of, put some silicone oil or some thread aid, some sewer's aid along there. So now we'll just top stitch along the top. So now we will retrieve our exterior front. So we've got, I'm going to do that on the back, and I'm going to do the black on the front. So we need to get our back. We should have all of our centres marked. Now with any sewing pattern, always check the instructions. In this, I do say to mark all your centres in the sewing instructions. So please do that at the beginning of your sewing. So then we're going to put that in the middle. Now it's also a good idea just to measure here and here, because even though this is lined up, this can be out of whack here. So you need to just make sure that it's actually level across the top. That's okay. And I suggest basting around the bottom. Now the other thing I'm going to do with this pocket, I'm going to divide up here and back. Now because of the way I've cut my fabric, I know that that is on my center line. So I'm going to start at the bottom, go up and 1 stitch and back down. So I'm going to go either side so I've got enough room to put a rivet in the top. Then I'm going to pivot, do 1 stitch over, and then come back down the other side. So what that's left to me is this little square here where I'm going to put my rivet. So that is our rivet in between our two pockets. So of course you can leave it as one big pocket if you want. You can put a magnetic snap on there, but I actually like it divided into two. Now if you want to, you could always put a key chain attached in here, or even under the rivet in the back, because this bag I use my keys in the front pocket. All right, we'll put that aside for now. So now we want to get everything we need for our credit card overlay pocket. So what we're going to do is we're going to get some 3mm double-sided tape, and we are going to put some tape along the top. Now, I don't know if you can see my cuts. That's going along the top, and I'm going to put a piece down below. Now, you can put it straight along if you want. It doesn't really make any difference. So let's do that. Now, this piece here, we want folded right sides together. Now, it is a good idea to iron that. This is going to crease quite nicely with finger pressing. So we're going to open that up and put it down, centered, so it's along the bottom of the tape. Now we know the tape is an eighth of an inch or 3mm, so that's going to be coming along the bottom of our credit card slot like that. Let's just push that into the tape, and we're going to turn it over, and we're going to sew from this edge of the slot to this edge here, stop and come over here, and so we're just sewing along right underneath each credit card slot. So as 8 on here, and again that's way too much. Oh well, it's all going to be nice and shiny now. So we're sewing along the bottom of each slot only. So we should be catching our fabric at the back. And then the next one. So what I've done, I don't know if you'll be able to see it because of the shine on there, is I've done one stitch and gone back over that one stitch 3 times. So I've got a definite end. So what we're going to do is now is turn that over and pull this down and just crease it down off that fold. Now you don't want to pull it down so it gapes like that. Just pull it down a little bit. Fold that back up. Take this top one off and have that along the top. Now it should just crease on your fold like that. We're going to turn it over, and what we want to do now is start in our stitch here, go up, and I would come back 3 times, across the top and down to this one. So we're actually forming a box around them all. So we're just sewing on the top because this one's folded down. So we're just going to catch the top, except for these points here, and that's perfectly okay. So we're starting in the seam or in the stitch where we ended before. So the reason we're going right around is because that's going to stop this ripping out through here. And what we can do now is pop a rivet right in the middle, because that's our 2 credit cards. But first, before we do that, we'll pull this back, take our tape off there, and we want to sew down the edge there, and then sew down here. But it's best to do it that way and just as far as you can, because it's just dividing the pocket. I do them all from the bottom, it's easier. So that is our 2 credit card pockets. See, it's stitched right around the whole thing. So I'm just going to put a rivet in there. Now you don't have to. If you feel this might weaken that point, then don't do that. So as you can see, I've put my rivet further down. I have not put it in line with the credit card slots because we don't want this encourage, because we don't want that to be a weak point there. So what we need to do now is find our zip, which is one of these little ones. So what we do is put our fabric both right side up. Now I'm going to separate this and put those both right side up on the joining edge like that. And we're going to sew down both of those. Get that down. Grab one of your zipper pulls. Now what you do want to make sure is that your linings are going to line up, so that's fine. My zipper is right, so I can leave it like that. If you need to trim it, do so. At this stage, we are going to put our pull on and take it off the other end. And then just put it back on again. Now I might just melt my edges because they're a bit nasty. Now I just put it in about halfway, bring this on an angle, and then you should just hear it kind of click in. Just bring that to the middle. Now I'm going to put some double-sided tape in the seam allowance here, if I can find the end of it. So just along the seam allowance like that. Now you can sew these down if you want, and I often do, but this is creasing quite nicely down, so I don't think I need to. Now you notice I'm not coming to the end. We're just going to lift that off later anyway, so there's no real need. So now we'll put that aside. So then we want to retrieve our lining, which that's going in, and our zipper overlay template. Now as you can see, it's got a little center mark, so we're going to line that up with our top, and we're wanting to cut out this rectangle. So there's a couple of ways of doing that. You can either just cut that out and draw it, which is probably the easiest. And I should not be cutting paper with my scissors. So I've got that and I've drawn the lines, so I'm just going to cut those out. So we just need to cut that rectangle out completely. Because what we're going to do is get our overlay and put our credit card slots through there like that. make sure this is all level because these are fairly tight with where they can be. That's in the middle, so you shouldn't need to check anything, but I can tell by my lines that that's level at the top. So we're just going to put some double-sided tape. Actually, I'll put some under the bottom on my fabric. I've made that a mess. And just set that down. I'll put some thinner stuff along the top because I don't really want to be sewing through it. It is a good idea to put some around the sides as well. The more secure it is, obviously the better it's going to sit and it's not going to have any chance of moving. Is sew around the outside of this. So we're going all the way around, up there, at the top and back. But you've got this here. So what you want to do is I would start here, go all the way up and down. And as you're coming down, stop here and flip that up at the back so it's not going to be in your way. If this is in your way too much, you can trim that corner off. So as you're coming down this side, you can feel where your pocket starts. And just flip that up and back out of the way. As you can see, I've left long threads to pull them through. So now we're just going to cut our rectangle. Now we want it to go slightly under our overlay, but not too much. Just don't cut your overlay. Now this is why you want this bit taped down, because it is quite loose in there. We'll sew that down so it keeps it nice. Okay. So now we want to get our pocket. Now I want mine closing to the left, so it's entirely up to you how you want yours to be. I'm going to take the top off, and you can kind of see when it's centered over the pocket, so I put my finger there and flatten that out. Now I usually sew down over those, but I haven't today. Lift that up and take the bottom one off. So we're just doing this now exactly like we would any other overlay. So again, we're going to sew around the inside rectangle and either leave long tails or back tack, whichever you prefer. Make sure our linings are out flat in the back and that is down. I'm just sewing around the inside. I'm going to pull those through, tie those off. This is bonded nylon thread, so it can be a little bit, have a tendency to bounce back. I'm just going to put that down there. Right, so at the back, we just want to fold our pocket down. And we want to trim. Now I've got interfacing only half of it. We want to trim those to be level. But watch, you've got this. So you want to make sure it's not being caught behind. So I'm going on that line. So we're going to pull that back and we're going to sew down there, across the bottom, and back up here. Now it's purely up to you if you want to sew on here and keep these credit cards in place. I quite like to do that if I can, but it doesn't really matter. They are fine where they are, so you can just sew down around it. Right, so at this point I'm going to cut my zip. On both sides. Don't forget to always mount your zip. So that's your zipper pocket with your 2 credit card slots in there. So that is our front lining. So we'll put that aside for now. So now we're going to put our zipper overlay pocket on the back. So we want our overlay, our 2D linings, our back exterior. We will use some double-sided tape. We also want our zipper and our pull. And we are given a measurement in the pattern, how far down. So we should have marked our lines. Now I do have a mark on the fabric. Okay, so I know that that line there is the middle of my fabric anyway. So I'm going to go. Oh, and that black line is how convenient is that? That is the line I want for the top. It makes it easy when I've got checks, doesn't it? Now don't be tempted to stretch your overlay if your vinyl has got a little bit of give. Make sure it's not stretched, because then you will get a wavy zip on the inside, which is actually some of the problems I've seen with wavy zippers. If this stretches around the inside, then your zipper will be wavy. So now we're just going to sew the outside edge, so right around the outside. Now I like to keep mine within about 3mm, but it's entirely up to you how close you want to go. And pull that through. So I'm going to leave that to one side. Like that. So now we're going to do the same and cut out the fabric around the inside. So we'll put that aside for 1 minute and we'll get our linings. So we want those up the right way if we're going to do it the same as we did last time. We're going to have our zipper split and put them up the right way as well. And it gets me every time, but if you do that, you'll get it right. So you can center the zip on there or you can just line it up, and we're just going to sew across those. So zipper and fabric right side up. So then when we open the zip, the pocket is going to be the right side inside. So it's up to you whether you trim these to be able to do it. I find it's just as easy to go like that and make sure that's lined up. And I will trim my zip so that it's the same at that point. Then I know where to put it. So we're going to be putting the zip on completely and then taking it off and bringing it back onto the middle. And bring it back onto the middle. But in doing so, I know this one needs to go in slightly further than that one, so it's going in first. That's the middle. Let's put some more double-sided tape on here. Again, I'm not bringing it to the edge because we're just going to take it off anyway. Take the top piece off. Right. The other thing I do, because I've got this really thin fleece on there, is I just run my lighter along the very edge of that, just very quickly, and it just takes that ridge off the fleece. Now, be careful doing this. Depends on what kind of fleece you've used. Always test a bit over a sink or a rubbish bin first. You don't want to have a fire. Right, so I can line that up. So that's about level. So I want it level that way, and then I want these level over the zip. Lift that up. This is a really good example of, see how the zip here is bent down? I'm not going to, when I solder here and move the zip, I'm going to rearrange this piece of tape because I don't want it sewing with that bobble in it. Again, we're just going to sew close to the rectangle, right around the middle. Making sure your pockets are out flat. Again, pull those through. Now I tend to start sewing at the top. The knot is going to be hidden in the top of the pocket and you're not going to see it. Right, so now we want to pull that down and do the same trim along there. Of course, we've got that there as well, so I know I'm going on that line. So again, pull this back to the side, sew down there, along the bottom, and back to the other side. Let's trim. Now I quite like adding a rivet at the end of there, but you don't need to if you're happy with that. Just keeps everything nicely in place, and that's our zipper pocket. So we should put that to one side. So now we'll look at our strap loops. We have 2 of them. And it depends on your machine as to whether you want to put double-sided tape down the middle or not. I am going to. This machine doesn't really matter too much. We'll see what it's like with this tape. It's an old tape. So these do need to not stretch. So I have added interfacing on these, but you don't want them too thick either because it is going to be an area that's going to be thick later on. And we're just going to fold those into the middle, like so. Just shy of the middle actually, because we're going to fold it again. And then I'm just going to clip that like that. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sew across the bottom, just because it's fraying, down this edge, down the open edge, and across the bottom. I'm not sewing all the way around. So the next thing I'm going to do here, and it's entirely up to you which way you want it. I like mine to be in the middle, but if it's not sitting very well, you can have it that way. We're going to sew them tight together like that. So keep them as tight as you can and just sew along the bottom, just to hold it all in place. Like that. So it doesn't matter if you prefer the stitching in the middle, you can have it either way. So now I'll just do the other one. So that's our strap loops. Now you can replace this with a D-ring if you want. You want it no wider than that. So we are looking at, it should be just less than 1 inch. Yes, it is. That is our strap loop. So we'll put those aside for now. So what we're going to do now is look at assembling our body. So we've got our exteriors and we've got our linings. Now what we're wanting to do on the wrong side of these is make a mark. And we want to come in 3/8 or 1 centimetre from the ends. I'm using an erasable marker. So on the lining, we want this mark to be 3/8 deep. So we need to put a mark at the 3/8 because we're actually going to snip it at that point. Just in the lining. So we're going to make a snip to there. And we're actually going to get a little bit of double-sided tape. Now I suggest doing this, you don't need to, but it does make life easier as you go through the bag, because this piece needs to be kept out of all seam allowances. It's never sewn in, and it's a lot easier if it's just permanently out the way. So what we're doing here is folding that notch, or we're calling it a notch, back on itself like that. So in the pattern from now on, this little piece will be referred to as the notch, from there to there. And we keep that out of all seam allowances. That double-sided tape is a little bit big. Let's use something a little bit smaller. So I'll do this side. So let's start with our front and our zip. Now we're going to put that right sides together. Now you can center your zip and put a little mark on your zip if you wish. I'm going to eyeball that there and there. So we're going to put that right sides together with the mark on there. If you do it that way, you can actually see your center line. So I'm just going to baste across the top. It's all basted. Then we're going to get our front lining. Now our front lining is the one with our credit card on it, because I want that at the front. It's much easier to see. But if you want it on the back, you're more than welcome to put it on the back. Now again, we're going to line up our linings. And as you can see, our notch is well folded back and out of the way. So now we want to sew across the top with a generous 6mm. So obviously we're not going to catch this because it is much lower. So now we're going to open that up like that, give that a good finger press, flip it back. And we're going to top stitch along this edge. Now just check, we don't want to be catching this at all. So it's a good idea to fold that under, and you should just come into the edge of it because you've got about 3mm left there. So we shall top stitch across that, minus catching that. So at the back, we should be coming in right to the bottom of it, but they should be loose still. It's our front. Then we shall get our exterior and do the same. Line up the centers, right sides together. And baste across the top. So we're basting. And down on the wrong side, we want to put our lining right sides together. Now I haven't marked my centers. There's my center. And we're going to do the same, sewing across there, making sure we don't catch our notches. So you can sew from either side. I always like to sew from this side, but you can do as you normally do. Again, open that up, press that back, bring your exterior down, and now we're going to top stitch down that seam. Again, we're not going to be catching that notch in the back. So that is what we've got, both attached and top stitched. So I'm going to put my zipper pull on. Always pays to put this on before you forget. And I'm going from the right because I want it to close to the left. If you want it to close to the right, you would put it on from the other side. So I'll put that to one side for now. So now we want our C1 and C2s. So we'll start with one exterior C1. We're going to pick up one of these, put it right sides together along the curve. So you've got the arcs going the same way. Like that. And we're going to sew down there. We are given the seam allowance in the pattern. Open that up out of the way and then put the other one on the other end, lining it up so that the curve meets. And do the same, sew down there. So now we've got two ends like that. Now make sure it's not twisted, and we're going to put this one on top of those right sides together. So that one there. So we're forming a ring. And then that one on there. So nothing is twisted. And sew down both of those. So now we want to open those up and butterfly or top stitch down each side. Now keep them fairly close. Don't be within the 3mm definitely, or within the 1/8 of an inch. Like that. So what I do to trim that seam now, turn it to the back and fold it over like that. So you've got nothing at the back, just there, and we're going to trim that seam allowance off. Then simply fold it the other way. So you've got nothing you can cut at the back. And trim that off. And I will do that with all the others as well. So that's our exterior ring all top stitched and all trimmed. So we're going to do the same with our lining. So when you've got it sewn this side to there. So those seam allowances are going out, and these seam allowances are coming in, and just sew down there. So that's all sewn. See, they're sewn on the inside and they're sewn on the outside. So again, make sure it's folded right over there and just trim the seam allowance. If you do it from this side, there's no chance of catching this fold. It's a bit close. So line up your middles. Now you do want to make sure your middles are snipped, so line up your seams and make sure they're snipped. We should have done this before. And it is important to have this piece here, the centre snipped as well. So all our centres are marked. The next thing we want to do is do some snips right around the inside. Now these should be about 6mm and fairly close together. Now you can do it through both, and if you're going to do that, make sure it's completely level. And they're fairly close together. If you're worried about going too far, you can put a mark or a piece of tape on your scissors. And you do want to have a notch fairly close to both sides of that seam. Now this is important. I know some people cut it smooth later, but we are not going to be trimming this seam for quite some time. So you do want these notches, and it won't fit, it will not fit without notching it. Any curve that has got a seam allowance, to get it to fit accurately, you need to notch. If you want to trim it smooth later, feel free, but honestly, it may not be a popular opinion, but you do need to cut slits in a curve when it's going onto a different curve, or even a flat sometimes. Right, so do that on the lining as well. So they are both notched, as you can see. We'll put our lining aside and retrieve our body. So I'm going to have the front facing towards me. I'm going to open out my ring. So you've got the notched pieces by the zip and the others out there. So we're simply going to turn that over and line up our center point on here with the center point of our body. Now we're only clipping it to the body, not the lining. At no stage at this point does this lining get sewn in with the exterior. And down here, the center point on here. This bag has some different construction, and sometimes we think, okay, we can just, our brain goes into auto mode and we just do what we think we always do, but you may come unstuck doing that with this bag. Now at this side, flip that over and line up the center mark with the zip, like that. And because the zip's there, well, you can cut the zip if you want to, or trim the zip and put it in close. Now you're not catching the notch or the lining at the back. So take the lining out of the back. Oh, my little notch has come off its tape. So the lining is going to be folded out the way when we sew that at the back. And we'll just clip around there. Again, flip it in, line up now do make sure that you have put your zipper pull on, because it's going to be too late to do it once we've done this seam. Fold the lining back so you're not clipping it in. You do want to make sure that that doesn't get pulled, so make sure it's level like that. In fact, if you want to, you can put double-sided tape across there, because that will be quite useful later on. As you can see, we're putting these notches fairly open, so if you hadn't cut them, there's no way this is going to fit smoothly. So the one caveat I will say, and it is a pain with this pattern, you really need to check your lining is not being caught in at the back at any stage, because it's just a natural thing as you're sewing to think it's all good and not check. So do make sure all the time that your lining's not being caught. I don't know how many times making this pattern I have had to unpick and do it, because when you sew you want all of this out the way at the back so that you can sew around it, and then you'll have to kind of readjust and put this lot out the way, so you're not catching that either. So I'm going to start over a zip, making sure that both of those are out the way at the back. So check you haven't caught anything at the ends. Make sure your lining is still, your notches are out. So that is what you've got on the outside. Now do not be tempted to go and trim the seam. What we are going to do is we're going to snip through both layers, just our exteriors, and make those snips come right as close as we can without cutting our main stitching all the way around. Now, I know the temptation is just to cut this nice and smoothly. We will do that later, but we want to anchor our lining to this seam. Now, if you're not wanting to anchor your lining, you can trim it. But personally, I like to have the lining all nice and taut on the inside of the bag. Now, that may be a new thought for you, and if you'd like to give it a try, just follow the process. If you've used thicker fabric like I have with the denim, it's quite tough. And in doing that, you're going to be able to get a really nice turn to do a top stitch around here. Let's do this side. So I'll carry on around the other side. So I also trim my zipper a little bit after that section, just down to the seam allowance. And again, always melt it. And make sure you didn't catch anything when you cut it. Should have checked that, shouldn't I? That was close. Mind you, it shouldn't be. Okay. So now we want to turn this over. And we've got our linings like that. Let's put that in so we can see what we're doing. We're going to get our lining ring, and again, line up the middles with the middles, the notches at the side, and line that up with the middle center point. And we should have already snipped around it. Do the same at the bottom, right sides together with our lining and center point. And here we're going to put that mark and actually clip that. In fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a bit of double-sided tape on there. Hold the lining back and just put it there. Now you can glue this or you can do what you want with that there. Just keep it there because you will use it later. We're not actually attaching anything to it at this stage. We're just putting it there because it's easier before we sew the seam. So now back to that, we're going to line that up with the middle of our zip. And I'm just going to put a clip over the zip to hold it in place. But then I'm going to pull the lining forward and just put a clip on the lining on either side. So not the back, just the lining. So we're sliding it into there. So at the side, our lining is not attached to anything here. I've only put that clip there so that I know where I'm clipping here. We can take that off in a minute, but I'll finish clipping around. On this side, the same. A clip on the middle of there, so that then we know it's going to stay there. We can just slip a clip in there and slip a clip in there. So if we take that off now, we've got this, and it's all free, hanging in the breeze, and that's what we want. We don't want it attached to the exterior at any stage at this point. So I'll just keep clipping around there. So that is all clipped around separately from our exterior. Now we do not want to catch our pockets, and we do not want to catch the exterior. But all we're doing at this point is sewing from here around to here, and then from there around to there. So we want to get as close as we can to this point here. So it depends on your machine how we can achieve that. I start here and I backstitch. I fold this back, and it's easier to backstitch than it is to get your machine right in there. So just come as close as you can. Doesn't matter, we're going to fix that in a minute. Go all the way around and then come in as close as we can to our zip there. We are going to do a process in a minute that actually joins that, so we're just getting as close as we can. Keeping the exterior right out the way. I took 2 steps forward, and now I'm going to go back as far as I can. And then just come forward and sew around. When you get to the other end, make sure it's all folded back and just come as close as you can. So as you can see, I haven't been able to stitch all the way up. That's okay. That's what we want. We just want it as close as we can. We can fix that in a minute. So I'll now sew the other side. So now at this end, so I have just realized that I forgot to top stitch before I added my lining ring. So what we want to do is top stitch our ring here. So what we're going to do here is fold all the lining out the way, and we're going to top stitch on this side, so on the ring side, all the way around, and keep that fairly tight at 3mm at the most, right around the whole ring. So remember, keep everything out of the way. Right, so check you haven't caught anything in the back. Nope. So I've left long tails, so I'm going to pull them through. And again, I always put long tails in the back. Don't put it on your seam because we're going to use that seam. It doesn't stick to the fleece very well. Never mind. Okay, so I just had to go back and do my top stitching because I forgot. So what we're going to do now, and this is where this piece of tape comes in handy, I'm going to take that piece of tape off, and we're just going to attach that. Now, some of my testers opted not to sew this and just to glue this piece, and that's entirely up to you. What we're wanting to do is basically sew between these two seams because we need to secure that. Now, I'm going to leave that back that way, and you can either fold that down and just go through the seam allowance here, like that, so that you're sewing along the seam allowance. My preferred option is to leave that down like that, flip that over, make sure it's down, and I'm going to sew in the ditch. Now make sure everything is nice and flat at the back when you do that. And sewing in the ditch just means that we're sewing in between where the seam meets. I'll do the seam and I'll show you. And if you do it slow, pull it open and just sew as close as you can without catching the fold of the seam. Now you can leave long tails. So as you can see, that's closed that up nicely. And on this side, you really can hardly see that seam. Doesn't matter at all. And I'm using a contrast. So I much prefer that method. So we're folding that back. At the back, I have put double-sided tape in the seam. And we are going from, I'm going starting at the pocket. And I know I ended just about there. So make sure that's all level. So that closes that gap. Your lining's all attached. And you can hardly see it in the gap. But as I said, you can just tack it on there and it doesn't matter. In fact, a couple of my testers just taped it and left it. So it's entirely up to you. It's purely to tidy up the inside of the bag. So now we are going to fold our exteriors only. Lining out the way. I'm just going to put a clip on the bottom just because it's easier. Then I'm going to line up the two top pieces. I'll put a clip on there. And we are literally just sewing 2 inches here. That's it. Because it gets a bit difficult to put our ends in if we sew the whole lot. So we're just lining up the ends by the zip, just the exteriors. And just sewing a couple of inches at the top. Making sure again we're not catching anything behind. So what you've got is this piece there. Take the bottom clip off. Retrieve my strap loops or your D-rings if you've done D-rings. And I'm going to push those in like that so that this end is coming out that gap. Like that. As you can see, if we sew down here, it's going to be a little bit awkward to do this. So we're wanting it flat like that. We want to separate that seam. And you can kind of feel when it's sitting nice and flat and even across there. I'm going to have about 3/8 or 10 mil out there. And I'm going to sew, I actually like to have a line on here, between my 2 slits, just below the 2 slits. You can see the slit there, and you can see the slit there. Make sure they're in the middle of that, like so, and that it's straight across. Now, if you've got your D-ring, it is going to be fairly tight in here, and you can put a clip back here if it's going to keep it all nice and straight. Now, if you've used something thicker, this could be a bit of a tight sew. So if you want to hand crank it, you can just make sure that seam's open, and we're just coming along just under the line we have sewn. Now, I tend to sew from the middle. I put my machine in the middle, back up, back over it, and then come over it a couple of times. Now, the reason I start in the middle, because if you start here, you're fighting to get up here. So that's what that is like. And you can feel it's nice and out at the end. And if you want to pull that out and have a look at it, just to make sure that's what we like. So actually I've got the clip on there so that you can't see that perfectly. And so that's like that. Or you would have your D-ring showing out here. I'll just pop that back in there for now. And do the same with the other side. And now we're simply going to clip along the rest of that seam. So join up our middles, join up our seams, make sure they are lined up. That is definitely going to be visible if they don't line up. So we're just sewing from where we stopped sewing at the top and finishing off that bottom seam. So again, always make sure with this bag nothing is getting caught in the back, and we're sewing from that seam around to that one. Okay, so I'm going to leave that seam as it is for the moment, and I'm going to come to the front. So what we're going to do now is we put our lining right sides down. As you can see, our pocket is bigger than that, and that's okay. So we've got our pocket here. We're going to clip our centers together. And clip there. Now I'm going to sew down into the seam. Now some of my testers actually sewed all the way along, but I like to keep this length in the pocket. So I'm going to sew between where that stops. Now we are going to sew from the other side. I'm just clipping it in from here so that you can see quite clearly what I'm doing. Now if you've used something thick, this can be a bit tricky, and you can forego this if you wish, or just put a couple of tacks in a little piece, like just sew a couple of little pieces here and there. This is purely to hold the lining in place and keep it firm in the bag. I do like it to be over the edge of the overlay a little bit, just to hold that all nicely. So what I'm going to do now, turn it over to the other side of that seam. I'm going to sew within the seam allowance between about there and there. In the bottom between there and there. And at this side between there and there. As I said, some of my testers went all over and cut the pocket, but it's entirely up to you. So that's all we're doing, is a piece like that, and that holds the lining to the exterior. So as I said, you can forego this step if you wish, but it really does make a nice difference in the bag and sits the pocket really firmly. So it sounds pretty complicated, but that's all we're doing, is joining those two seams, keeping the pocket out there if you wish. The reason I do that is then in this pocket, that's going to be really secure to the bag, but still have full access to the side of the pocket. So what I'm going to do now is we can trim that bit on the inside of that, do it from this side again so that you're not, and make sure that lining is held down at the back. You can come across there if you wish. There's really no need to, because that's held fairly tight. But this bit here, bring that into your anchoring seam, and I've gone a bit crooked there. This seam here we're not anchoring because you can't turn it through, so I'm just going to trim that a little bit. And this seam here, trim that around the top stitching. Like that. So that is our bag so far. So now we want to bring our lining up to meet and do the same with our lining. Join in the middle. Now this gets a bit tricky because it's joined here. So you want to pull that in really tight. Now we're going to sew the top couple of inches again and box that. But as you can see, that's quite tight. And then all we're doing is bringing that piece up like that and sewing. Open the seam and sewing across the box like we did before. Now again, this is quite fiddly and it is so far up in the bag that you actually don't really see it, but it is nice if it's all properly done. So we're going to sew across there. And then I'm going to actually trim that off. So that's just boxed like that on the other side of there. I do actually sew that through like that, which you can do now. Now, if this is too heavy because of the lining, maybe just do a couple of stitches in the middle. So back to this side. So the top couple of inches. Now, if it's easier to get your finger in there to flatten that out, because we're folding it at those peaks like that, remember, but it's difficult because it is attached to the bag. Like that, and open up that seam. And we're just sewing across the top of there the best we can. Like that. So it doesn't even matter if you get little creases or folds in it, and just trim that a little bit. Bring that into the end so that the seams line up like that. And just a couple of stitches in the middle is more than enough. It just holds it all up in place. As I said, if you can't, maybe glue it or hand tack it. So what we're going to do now, we're going to leave a turning gap in the middle. So we line up our two seams, so they're nested, one's one way and one's the other. I've made one in vinyl that was a little bit of a tough turn, but I managed to do it, so it just depends on the thickness of your fabric. So what we're going to do now is sew from where we joined to just past. And as I said, if you're doing something thick, you might want to stop further back so that you can turn through. Right, so this here is where we anchor again. Now it is purely up to you, again, if you do this. And this is going to be tight up here, so we're not going to come in too tight. So we're going to line up our seams. So the middle of our seam is there. And I'm just going to sew a couple of inches or that much there. The seam allowances together. Make sure none of your pocket linings get caught in here. So you can go as high as you want here if you can get up there, but there's no need to. It'll stay up in the bag quite well. So we're just sewing along the seam allowance, fairly close to our seam. Now I do it from this side, and I stop when I get to the seam. You want to be about an inch shorter. You want to be an inch back from where you stopped there, because it's hard to close it if it's right at the same space. And I'm going to actually trim that seam to just shy of my anchoring, and I'm not going to cut that like that. Now you can, at this point, also trim your exterior. Not your lining, just your exterior. Oops, that's a bit close of an inch. And then we're going to do the same at this side. Sure nothing's caught. That is our bag. Let's tidy up all your insides. So now we're wanting to turn it to be wrong side out. So push those through there. Now I don't go all the way through because I like to close it at this point. So I'm going to turn that under slightly and bring in my seams to match. As you see, if we'd anchored all the way to here, we wouldn't be able to turn this in. Because we're stopping there, because that's where our seam stopped. So I'm now going to sew from here, which is where my seam stopped, on both edges to where it stopped back. There, let's get that folded well. And I'm going to sew on the very edge. I do like these closed by hand, but for expedience of the tutorial, so that's closed like that. So now we're just going to open our zip and actually fold our bag through it. Just don't put too much pressure on the end of your zip. You can roll that seam out a bit if you want. Give that a bit of a hammer, especially where it's thick. Often our bags just need a really good amount of shaping once it's finished. But since this is in fabric, it should shape really nicely. And you put your hand up and push all your lining out completely. And because our lining's fixed to the front, see it just sits nicely there, and it's fixed at the side, so it just sits all out nicely at this side. So the lining should fit really, really well. So what I might do is just put some clips on the edge. Now I always do this with a vinyl bag, at least. Where's my, on my seam? So let's sit that for a while and let that set in its new shape. And I shall do the strap. So this is our knotted straps. As you can see, I'm using denim, so it frays like terrible. I've put some standard high loft fleece on that. So you can put double-sided tape and stuff down the middle. I'm not going to. So I'm folding it over the fleece, bringing them into the middle and folding it. So I'm just going to clip along that. So again, folding them both into the middle and then rolling it to be level. So the reason I'm doing a bit by bit is it's very easy with fabric to start having bits that are uneven in this join. And then just push those in to match. Now I've put the fleece or the foam in, depending on what you want. I've put the fleece in this because I want it to be quite soft. I don't know if it's enough. Maybe I should have put foam in it, but depends on your fabric. It is something that each fabric reacts quite differently with the strap, so sometimes it's a matter of having a little bit of a play. With vinyl, a thicker vinyl, you don't need any fleece, any foam or anything in between. Thinner vinyl, it's nice to have a little bit of fleece or something in it. Probably should have been foam. I just didn't know with this frame whether I was going to pull it too much. So I'm just going to keep going along the edge like that. So I'm folding it into the middle and then over like that. Because you want these pieces together, because we are going to sew just down that one side, not both. Now when it comes to the end, it's entirely up to you whether you want to turn it over and do it like that. Personally, I'm just going to leave it like that, and I'm going to put it in a zipper end, or I will glue and edge coat. So once that's finished, I shall deal with the raw end. So what we're going to do now is sew. Put this one aside, we'll do that later. We're going to sew down one end, making sure you catch both edges, and I'm going to sew across the very end as well. So again, I'm going to start in the middle here, go back, come forward, and then pivot and go down there. So hopefully I have enough in my bobbin to do that. Okay, so that is our strap. As you can see, it's not twisted, and I have sewn across the ends. Now, if your strap is twisted, there's a couple of reasons it could be. One, you haven't cut it straight on the grain of your fabric. Two, you've pulled it one way as you've been taping it or clipping it together, or you actually haven't cut it straight. So they are the main reasons why, because we're just sewing down one side, so it's not going to be pulling it from your machine. So we've got our 2 lengths of strap. So I'm going to use a couple of 1/2-inch swivel clips. Now the caveat with using these is always check that they're going to be able to be clipped onto your bag like that. If you've used a thick vinyl, you might need to go up a size, but I quite like these on. Now this is an adjustable strap. If you were doing fixed, I will go through that. So what we're going to do is start with this end maybe. So we're going to put it through the swivel like that, and we're going to bring it through by about 9 inches. Now my fabric is quite thin, so I don't know if we're going to need the 9 inches. So that's about 9 inches there. So it's through by about 9. I'm going to bring it up to the front. So that's how I've got it at the moment. I'll move all that so you can see it. So keep it, actually let's put a clip in there, that might help. Oops. Keep a clip there, just so that it stays. I'm not having to hold that. Bring it underneath, so that it's like that. I'm going to hold it there, but bring it up and over. And I'm going to go around twice like that. So it's like 2 rings. And I'm going to bring this one up and put it through here. Put it through those 2 loops. Now don't just be tugging this, because that's going to misshape the whole knot. So what we're going to do is we're going to push that around to tighten it, and then pull that bit tighter, just piece by piece. We're going to work it. If you just pull it, it's going to really misshape it, and it's not going to end up looking like that at all. So that's the knot we want. Now take these off, and if that's going to slide, we want it tighter. So what we can do is bring that back around and pull it tighter on that one. And then just keep trying it until it's not going to slip. But you don't want it tied too tight, because it will misshape the knot. So that's fairly tight, and it's not going to slip on the swivel there. And I like a little bit here. You can have that loose. You can do whatever you like that. We're going to try finishing those in a minute. And then if you're wanting a fixed strap, you would just do the same on the other swivel. So you'd keep it all flat, put that through, and do the same on the other swivel. Actually, it is quite a bit easier with that attached through there. So then that would be your fixed strap. But we're not. We're doing an adjustable strap. So we'll do that on the other one of those two. Let's do it again. We're going through the swivel by about 9 inches. And it is actually easier if you clip that in place so that you're not having to deal with that. I'm going to hold it back here. I'm going to go up, over, and around. So we've got, whoops, it's getting a bit, hang on, I've got to hold it in place. It's twice around like that. So you've got 2 loops up to the top and through the 2 loops on the top. Now don't let these misshape, as I said before. We want a little bit more through there. So we just work it around through the knot. It'd be easier if we had 4 hands or so to do this. Now if it does get out of shape, it is easier to undo it and start again than trying to fix it, in my experience. So holding there, up and over, so it's our 2 knots, or our 2 loops, sorry, we're wrapping it twice, and then we're coming up to the top and through the 2 loops. And we're just going to work more around that because we need more. Keeping those 2 loops together all the time, because once that's misshapen, it's going to be difficult to get back. So I suggest actually playing with a bit of cord to do this the first time, a couple of times you do it, until you get it right. But it is just a matter of manipulating it to get it right. And so you can slip that one to make it bigger. Now I've got a bit much of a gap here, so I can always tighten that later, and I can tighten and loosen that one. But it's taking quite a bit of pressure to tighten it, so you can keep tightening. Once you've got the loop formed, you can tighten it a bit more. So that's the 2 on our ends. So we're going to put one at one end and one at the other end. So what we're doing now is just wrapping that around it loosely like that. Now you can go 3 times. I'm going to go twice. Then we're going to bring it up at the back and through there like that. And we're going to hold that in place and just work it until it's exactly what we want. So you can see which ones do what as you're playing with it. So again, if you just pull it tight, it's just going to turn into a big mess of a knot. You want to keep it exactly in its knot like that, so that you've got the 2 at the front and it does cross over at the back and it slips on that one like that. So you can pull that tight and pull that tight, but again manipulate this so that it keeps its 2 loops nice there. And we're going to turn it around the other way because I can only do it one way, and we're going to keep that nice. We're going to bring it up behind, wrap it around twice like that, and then we're going to bring it round to this hand and put it down through there like that. Keep those 2 in place. Now if you've wrapped it the 3 times, it's actually a little bit easier to hold it in place. And then you just have to work that tight, figuring out which is that one there. Just tightening them, keeping it in the 2 loops. And then a bit of a pull, and that a bit of a pull. All right, so that's slipping way too freely, so you just need to tighten this up more. by just rolling those around and tightening that like that. Like that. Yep, that one's nice and tight. That one's a little bit loose. So again, just do a little bit of tightening. And that's your strap. So that can be tightened and loosened as needed. But you don't really need much there to be comfortable on the shoulder. Now I have put several layers of Oddy coat and then done some edge coating on the end. This is a vinyl one, and as you can see, I've put zip ends on those, and I've done that for 2 there and 3 there, whereas this is just the 2 knot. And in different fabric, it definitely looks different. So it's sometimes the sort of thing that you probably need to have a play with and see what you like, and it's a matter of manipulating the knot to be how it's supposed to be and sitting how it is. So there is our wave with our strap. So that is our urban wave, and strap and all. I hope you enjoy sewing yours as much as I did, and thank you for watching.